this is the way that we're basically doing font loading at the moment. Every different weight is a whole separate file. Italics are a separate file. So if you have bold italic, it's its own file. If you have normal italic, it's its own file. You can end up with a fair bit of, well, a fair few different files. Probably as performance-minded people, I doubt anyone is doing this on their website, having this many fonts. I think probably about the norm would maybe be 2 different typefaces, possibly 4 files for each, you know, an italic, a bold, and a bold italic, and a normal. Technically, you can just use 1 file, the regular non-italic version, and then you end up with what's called faux bold, faux italic. From a sort of typographical design perspective, it's considered like really not good. So in general, people shy away from doing that. Potentially, depending on who your designer is, there's also this CSS property font stretch, which rather than actually taking a font file and stretching it like it sounds, it's actually selecting a separate file. So you'd have to define a different font face for every single one of these things. And then you just have like loads of different fonts on your page. So that's really the thing that the problem that variable fonts is addressing. Potentially with 1 file, normally with 2. So you've got what are called axes. So these are defined by whoever is creating the font. So a typographer working for a foundry somewhere. You've got the weight, which is going to be the most useful one. So that's whether it's bold or really thin or whatever. You've got the width and italics. And then these 2 you probably won't use so much, slanted, and then optical sizing. Optical sizing is basically about taking a typeface and making it more legible at really small font sizes. So there's really not much to sort of learn as far as actually using a variable font. It does introduce 2 new CSS properties. You've got font optical sizing, which the actual default is auto, so it kind of just is on automatically, and you don't really need to be aware of that even exists. And then you've got font variation settings, which again, it's probably not something you'll need to use in the day-to-day, because rather than just using the 5 sort of standard axes of a font, a typographer can just make up whatever axis they want. It could be pretty much anything, and that's really, so far from what I've experienced, has been more for kind of crazy, avant-garde, more experimental, creative typefaces. So yeah, it can just be anything that the typographer wants it to be. Really, the only thing you'd have to do differently would just be add a new source into your font face. So you've got WOF2 variations, and obviously a variable file. This is kind of a separate topic, but I'm going to throw that in the example as well. Font display, it's got really good browser support now, so maybe use that as well. And then I'll talk a little bit about browser support. We've got stable, definitely the next release of Edge, hopefully the next release of Firefox, possibly the one after that. There is a caveat though, which it's kind of hard to use in Chrome because they haven't actually implemented absolutely everything yet, even though they're in the stable version. So that's kind of annoying. So I do have like one audience question. If you had a page of HTML that just had the word lorem ipsum, and the only CSS in your style sheet was what's on the screen, but you had 20 different font face declarations, how many fonts do people expect a browser to actually download? Would it be 20 or would it be 1? Hands up for 20. With a regular font. No, yeah, with any kind of font. Okay, that answers 1. So fonts are fonts are basically lazy loaded. So the browser will only download what it actually needs, which is kind of useful because it means if across your whole site, you're maybe using 8 different fonts on any particular page, it doesn't actually have to download all of them. So that is a good thing, and browsers made a great decision. But it does actually mean that ordinarily, the font's actually going to download really late, because this is if you're using a preloading. So by default, though, the font is going to be like really late downloaded, because to actually know what fonts a page needs, it has to parse not just all of the HTML, but also all of the CSS, because that's the only way it can find out, is this font actually being used? So I'm sure some of you have probably come across link rel equals preload. You just put it in the top of your HTML, and then it'll just download it straight away, which is kind of cool, but obviously you only want to do that if you're actually 100% sure that the resource is going to be used. And that's why they've got the type attribute. So obviously, if you're sending a resource to a browser and it doesn't know what to do with it, then that's kind of pointless. So you just specify what kind of resource it is, and then if it doesn't know what that resource is, it just won't download it. So you can preload variable fonts, but it is slightly slightly difficult at the moment, because there basically is no type. No MIME type for variable fonts. They're just WOF2 files, the way other fonts are. But I think because Chrome was the only browser that actually implemented preloading, Chrome and Opera, basically because Chrome updates itself like every 6 weeks and everyone's kind of on the latest version, possibly one version back. Once Chrome have implemented variable fonts for like at least 2 versions, you can kind of just assume it's safe to use. So that's cool. Do that as well. Does everyone know what a system font is? It's like your computer has a bunch of fonts pre-installed. So that'll be things like on Mac, it'll be Helvetica. On Windows, it'll be like Arial. Obviously, Times New Roman, unfortunately. Traditionally, they've been kind of ugly. Times New Roman, at least. They're getting a lot nicer. And because the browser doesn't actually have to download anything at all, that's still the fastest way to actually get a font on a page. But San Francisco has been the first variable font that's actually a system font. So if you're using Mac, you can use System UI as in your style sheet. And if your user is on a Mac, then there'll be no downloading of anything. And I think the benefit of doing that is you do get access to every different way of the typeface, whereas traditionally system fonts have just had bold and normal, and that's been it. And it's also the only system font that's not quite ugly. So that's still the best choice, but I'm sure most of us probably aren't in a position where we're the designer at our company and we get to choose like what fonts we're using. But if you're in that position, that's still the best thing from a performance point of view to do. But we have been using variable fonts already on nature.com. So this is with 2 files. We've got a italic file and a normal file. You kind of get like everything from crazy skinny to ultra bold. Some typefaces also come with the width setting, so you can just stretch it without distorting it. So That's probably more of interest to designers than performance people. That's the end.
Anyone got any questions for Oliver? Oh, one at the back.
Can you talk a bit about the flash of FOUT and FOIT, I think it is?
Sure, yeah. So by default, browsers do behave slightly differently, but the vast majority of them, they'll show no text whatsoever to begin with for, I think, 300 milliseconds. That's like the flash of invisible text. So even though it knows what text it needs to get on the screen, it just purposefully won't show anything. And then after that, you get the flash of unstyled text. So that's like a fallback font, so web-safe font, so Times New Roman if you haven't put anything in your font stack, or possibly you can pick something that's more similar to your actual custom font. And yeah, neither of them are very good. You know, you can now with the font display CSS property, you can just control which one you get. But ultimately, you're choosing between having a completely blank page and between quite a jarring effect where it kind of jumps from being one font to being another font, looks a bit kind of glitchy, not great either. And the only way you can avoid either of those is actually by getting the font to load as quickly as possible. So this is just one way that you do that, by only having like 2 files. Another way would be subsetting. Some fonts have like hundreds of glyphs, like, well, thousands. They support, I don't know how many Unicode characters there are now, but like a lot of the world's languages are now, will be supplied by a lot of fonts. So you're just getting a lot of characters you don't actually need. So you can just kind of get out all the characters you're not actually using and just slim down your font that way. I think if you're preloading a font, then you basically can completely avoid both FOUT and FOIT completely. But you don't want to preload too much stuff, because if you're sending like 8 different files at once, it's like, it's going to compete with other resources, so other things down, it's not great. So now really, I think we're just preloading 1 file. And yeah, as our main typeface, at least, there's not really, at least a decent connection, no FOUT or FOIT. So.
Any more? Got time for one more question before we start? Oh, I'll take the yes. You're too slow. It is a performance conference.
So I had a question about the San Francisco font. You said that it's available on Mac. What about on Windows? Because I mean, the whole point of system font, to my understanding, is that they will look the same Mac and Windows. So I noticed you made it very specific that the San Francisco on Mac was available. Is it still on other platforms?
So the whole point of a system font is it is going to be unique to the platform. So I think Linux has got its own fonts going on. Mac has got San Francisco. I'm not that sure. Like, there are a lot of different fonts that will come on your device. Mobile phones, different platforms will have different system fonts. And if you're using system fonts, like, you just have no way whatsoever of assuring consistency. So obviously from a branding kind of perspective, that's not great. I think for quite characterless fonts, like here we've just got sans serif. It looks pretty standard. If you changed it to Helvetica, if you changed it to San Francisco, probably nobody would notice. I actually have done that and like asked backend developers, like, can you notice any difference? And they've said no. But but yeah, there's no way to ensure consistency with that. Otherwise, probably a lot more people would do it, you know, because it is the fastest option. It depends on whether you value speed more or whether you value design control more.
Okay, right. Well, thank you, Oliver, for your talk.